Hi, and welcome back to another episode of DSC's Charity Questions podcast. I'm your host, George Knight, and today we've got Rob Avann here, and we're going to be talking about many different topics. And it's predominantly we're going to be spending time in fundraising. We're also going to be talking about leadership, leading in tough times. And so I want to get stuck in, Rob. I want you to say a little hello to the listeners, but basically just so that people know, you've kind of sat on every side of the funding table, haven't you? You've been the assessor, the commissioner, the trustee, the CEO, and we're going to look at that today. And of course, you're joining us for Grants Unlocked, talking about common mistakes in grant applications, which is going to be a very exciting topic, I know, for people joining that conference as well. And maybe we're going to get a little bit of those secrets today. So welcome to the podcast, Rob. We're so grateful to have you here.
Oh, it's brilliant. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me and inviting me on. It's always great to chat through these issues. So, yeah, absolutely good to be with you.
Exactly. And I did send Rob some questions and he got back to me and was like, do you know what? No, let's dig more into this leadership stuff. And so I'm really excited actually how the end of this podcast is going to turn out. I think I'm excited to see where you go with that one. But assessing grants, obviously, this is a trigger topic for many fundraisers and leaders in the charity sector. How do we get those big grant applications assessed and how do we put our best foot forward? And as I said, I'll repeat for the listeners, right? You've been an assessor, a commissioner, a trustee, a CEO. You hold quite a unique perspective, actually. I'm a little jealous, actually. It must be quite a nice insight you've gained. And so I wanted to start by talking about that. Your perspective you've managed to gather from all your experience. What's that taught you about making strong funding applications, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's taught me so much, George. And I think just by way of sort of introduction, I suppose, these days, obviously, I'm a charity consultant, and I went freelance last year. Prior to that, I've worked in and around the sector for around 20 years now in one capacity or another. So, yes, I've been a local government commissioner of services. I commission services, particularly in the domestic violence and community safety worlds, which was quite interesting, from that side. I've been, a chief exec for 8 years, mid-sized charities, 2 different national charities that I looked after. And yeah, I've been a trustee for 16 years, 5 different charities in that time in different parts of the sector. And I've been mentoring chief execs for the last sort of 5 years or so. So, and these days I very much focus on, leadership, governance and strategy is broadly my offer. So to come back to your question, in terms of what I've gained from sitting on each part of the funding dynamic, I would say you gain a huge amount of insight from being on the other side of the table, right? So I think, understanding, having been a trustee for a grant giving trust, having been a commissioner of services, having been a grant assessor, you see and understand the other side of the dynamic than I perhaps I did when I was a chief exec and applying for funds. Because there's so few trusts give feedback on applications. Absolutely. And help you really understand where you've fallen off or where you've not quite, made it through. And I think having that insight, I would definitely encourage anybody who's thinking about, doing some grant assessment on the side or, being a trustee for a grant giver is really, really helpful because you're definitely going to get that other insight on the other side of the table to see what it's like when things come through to you. You understand the competition, you understand the deadlines and the workload that you are dealing with when you are reading through these things that have been produced for you. And you see the really good, well-written ones that really stand out, and you see the ones who let themselves down by making, errors in their sort of pitch that ultimately mean they just fall below, even though the cause and the idea might be a really good one. Absolutely. They've just not done enough, to really sell themselves.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and I think it's something I've thought about actually joining a grant giving charity as a trustee to get that perspective. Yeah. I read a lot of applications through training and through the people that follow up with me, but to get to see the competition, I think that's a good point, isn't it? To see what it's actually like for these funders. So when you've been in that position then, are there any sort of mistakes that stand out to you? As I say, I know you're covering this at Grants Unlocked, but while we're here now, anything you want to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say probably the biggest area that I see being a major gap. There are lots of things, and obviously we'll get into this at Grants Unlocked, but in terms of a major one that I often see, it's the disparity between what the narrative of the application says and what the supporting information shows. And often where I see that is in the numbers side. It's in the impact, but it's particularly in the finance side where I can often see applications torpedo themselves through, sort of your numbers don't match up. And you can see that the joins between the finance aspect has been written by one individual and or a number of individuals by committee, and the narrative's been written by somebody else. And you can see the joins between what it said rather than actually having that consistent, that sort of thread of a narrative that's told you a story and has backed it up with the numbers in the narrative matching the numbers in the finance table. And that can be, even the ask. You see sometimes where the ask is reported as one thing in the finance table and it's reported as something else in the narrative. And instantly what that gives you as an assessor is that sense that people are maybe not on the same page, that there's that lack of understanding, that there's that lack of financial capability. And unfortunately, unless you work for a funder where you work relationally and you are willing to develop, and I'm fortunate at the moment to do some grant assessment for a funder that operates that way and will develop bids, so they won't be completely written out. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with so many that have come in and that competition and that demand, you're going to fall down, because if you don't do those things correctly, it's the easiest thing for your bid to be dismissed, despite the overall worth of it. So I would say that's the number one mistake that I see is that disparity in numbers.
It's almost hard. It's easy to lose credibility, but hard to earn it, right? It's like the minimum standard should be to be credible, but actually to lose that credibility happens quite quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yes. And of course, that's always proportionate, by the size of the organisation and the ask and other things. Obviously, you don't have the same expectations for an organisation that's got, a chief financial officer and and a board with lots of skills compared to a very small entity. But there's still that side of it that that capability, and as you say, that credibility is really, really important when you're assessing amongst so many. It's clearly an area where you can really fall down. So the biggest piece of advice I would give is to have somebody, doing that last check. Maybe someone who's not been as close to the bid, or someone in your network who's perhaps got some experience of grant assessment or writing their own, really good bids that have gone in, to really read it through and make sure that the narrative makes sense, that they haven't got immediate questions coming up in their minds, and at the very least check that your numbers, are sensible, that they match the request, that you've not left any glaring, stuff in there.
Yeah, and I'll say now, I say this to everybody I train, but if you're listening to this as well and you don't have that listener, send it to DSC, send it to me, George Knight at DSC, and I'll give you that eye. Absolutely.
Amazing.
I love reading applications, and I won't put Rob's name out there, but maybe you get him on LinkedIn, you could sweet talk him as well. And so I do romanticize that relationship piece. And you said you're a trustee, was it? Or you're volunteering with a grant giver that encourages the relationship. Are there funders you think out there that are just not interested in that kind of relationship piece between,
Yeah, I mean, look, I think unfortunately the nature of the funding world, and I think there's stuff on both sides for us to really think through. Having been in both capacities as an applicant and an assessor, I think the trusts and the funders that are moving to a relational approach and taking a very different approach of working in partnership is the right way forward, for both the people doing the assessment and for the applicants that are coming forward. There is no doubt of the value of that approach, but it is intensive, and not all trusts have the admin and the support to be able to do that and make it work. And so I think we also have to understand that sometimes funders aren't doing that, not because they don't care or they don't want to do it, but because there are other challenges that they're up against. And again, one of the areas where I think some funders are doing really well on this is being much more open, particularly at the moment, right? The world around us with funders right now, there are so many closed or on pause or taking strategic reviews. The funding climate is changing, and it's not going to get easier, I don't think, for charities in the next few years, certainly while the economy is where it is too. So there are changes to be made, but I think we also have to recognise there are challenges on both sides. But if you're a funder listening to this, the least you can do is be open and upfront with people around that and around the challenges that you have. And if you've got the way to be more relational and to move to a partnership approach, absolutely, that's the right way to go.
Yeah, and ultimately this gives them a better chance to understand and shape the need as well, rather than obviously relying on charities, which are experts of the need. But yeah, it gives
Yeah.
them that chance, doesn't it, to go a little further.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would say, George, as well, is that for charity leaders listening to this who make bids, I would also say that if you're lucky enough to apply to a trust or a funder that offer feedback, take up that feedback, because it is gold, right? There are so few funders that do that on a regular basis. That if you're offered that opportunity, take it up and take it on board and listen to what is being said and shared. And that is also our responsibility as charity leaders. And I have, been in a capacity as a grant assessor where you offer feedback and it's not taken up. And on the flip side, I'm sitting there as a former, charity leader and applicant thinking, why would you not take that up? Because there are so few out there that do that. It's absolutely gold dust if someone is willing to give you the benefit of their time and their expertise and their insight. Absolutely take it up. So I think there's things on both sides, I think, for us to do better.
Yeah. So I think that this is a whole familiarity piece, isn't it? Can we build these relationships? Maybe that might be the goal for every fundraiser, but not necessarily, unfortunately, the goal for every funder right now because of resources.
Yes.
You can double down on that and you can give that as your funding insider tip. But this is an opportunity to maybe add another tip to the arsenal for people listening today, if you have another one, Rob.
I would say it's really interesting. I would say definitely if you can build a relationship with a funder before you apply, and again, some of that has changed and it's not always that easy or that straightforward. If you can and do that and sort of reach out and, before you write your bid and get insights, they're going to help you to move things forward and to do that in the right way. And I think the other tip I would give is to come back to having somebody checking your narrative and your numbers who's not so close to the bid, who can really give that feedback into it, because someone else's eyes, when you're knee deep in it, it's hard for you to see, and it's hard for you to see sometimes the joins between the pitch that you are putting forward. And so somebody else is going to be able to spot that, and if they're willing to give you honest feedback on it and constructively help you change it, that again you should definitely take up. So I suppose be open to build relationships, be open to feedback, and absolutely take on board other perspectives before you press submit and you've sent it in and then it's done.
Yeah, it's like that. Don't finish it on the day. I'm always shouting,
absolutely
don't finish
not
it on the day. Yeah. Sometimes, not very often, but occasionally people send me a bid saying, "Oh, I've already sent this off, but could you read it?" And I think, you've got that the wrong way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing it in advance if you can. And I know it's hard. I know the pressures are tight and the funding windows are tight, and they're closing earlier than advertised because of the level of demand. And there's lots of challenges around that. So I'm not saying any of this is easy. It's not, and it requires work along the way. But definitely, I think being open to those things is important.
Yeah, and we talk about this in well-being. Stress is a reaction. We find stress in a reaction. If we're reacting to deadlines, then that is unlikely to be a well-being state of fundraising. But if we can be proactive and manage our time better, so it's always that fight to do as well, for a couple of reasons, for your own well-being, but also just to give you an opportunity for appropriate kind of processing after it's written.
Yeah.
I like it. So, of course, we mentioned credibility. And for me, a lot of credibility I see in the bids I read comes from the way they talk about how they're going to measure impacts. They show credibility and confidence because they're saying, well, not only do we want to do this, but I'm going to tell you in 3 months that we've done this, and in 6 months we've done this. So I see this be quite not straightforward. It's never straightforward, but I see big charities are great at this, right? Like medium charities are great at this. And then I potentially, having been a trustee of a small charity, recognize that this is just can feel like a burden, actually, on top of just delivering the project itself. So from your experience working with organizations of all sizes, is there any kind of meaningful or manageable ways to kind of take that approach if you're maybe struggling with the resource?
It's a really, really good question, and you're right, it's a constant challenge, and I feel for smaller organizations that don't have the resources available around you to take the same impact approaches. I would say I've worked with some really small entities who've been excellent at managing impact and monitoring it, much more so than maybe larger organizations. So I would say it's not always the case, but one thing I think on this to really build into your approach is to build impact in at the very beginning when you're designing the service that you're doing, or the way that you are basically trying to make the world a better place, which is what we're all in this sector to try and achieve. Really build that in from the get-go rather than trying to do it retroactively. I think where people struggle on impact evaluation is where you try and do it after the fact, and you're then trying to go back to a client group or to a, and it's just, it never works as well. So you need to really think it in at the beginning, as well as alongside your operational delivery of how are we going to capture and show the impact and the benefit that we've had and the impact that this delivers, and therefore we're able to report that to the people that have funded it and supported it. But you're also able to use that evidence to support your future bids, right? It's part of the same issue moving forward. And so I think build it in from the get-go and really think through impact measurement in the sense of, and there are some great resources out there, and some funders do provide, free support, around this, or extra support around it, because you also need to think through impact from both qualitative and quantitative, right? It's too easy to just go with pure numbers of this is how many people we saw, this is what we delivered during that period. Unfortunately, as an assessor who's seen millions of these over the years, honestly, that doesn't impress me much. That is sort of one element of it. I personally am often much more moved by case studies, by testimonials, by qualitative impact of showing the difference you've made to individuals or to the issues that you are resolving. So I'm always more of a qualitative guy. I think that probably appeals to me more, but I do appreciate there are lots of assessors out there that look for quant information, and that is where they feel more comfortable and are more sort of able to compare and contrast it between bids. So you need to be good at both sides. There's no doubt about it. You need to be able to do both, but build it in from the beginning and have your systems supporting that measurement to make it as easy for your people and for your service as you possibly can. Because if you don't, and it's really hard work and difficult for people, you're not going to capture the stuff. Or if you're going back to them after the fact, you're just not going to capture, and you're missing all that gold that you've uncovered. You're losing it all. So really build it in from the get-go, I would say.
Yeah, and your objective data can be a success measure of your subjective goals.
Definitely.
Right? I want to raise awareness of mental health. Well, we're going to do that by running 10 art classes and whatever it might be. But absolutely, what I'm seeing as a funder that connects to me is that we want to raise awareness of mental health in the community, or whatever that might be.
Exactly. And if you see impact as you only measure it because a funder asks you to report back on it for the money they've given you, that is one side of looking at impact. If you look at impact as a way of, this is how we understand the difference we are making, and we continually iterate our services, develop things to move things forward. This is how we speak to our communities about the impact that we make and why you should support us, fund us, give us money, why you should be a trustee for us, why you should work for us.
Come to our community
help your trustees understand what's going on the ground operationally, because they are removed from that. All of that is impact, right? So I think there is a way of looking at impact that it's not just about reporting to funders. It's wider for your organisation. And if you don't view it that way, I would say move towards viewing it as much more holistic.
It's an interesting point you make there. And I think I've seen trustees' eyes glaze over when they look at Gantt charts and the what sometimes. But actually, they love the why and the outcomes, output-led sort of projects, and I think that's something where they can really contribute. But take it away as well. It's not how we're doing it, but
absolutely.
This is what we want to achieve. And now they know the story of the organization in a better way. They've got their own little elevator pitch now. They can be a bigger kind of champion and maybe engage with other stakeholders in a different way, use their network in a slightly more effective way. I love this, and I think you've already answered what I wanted to go to next, which was this point about focusing too much on metrics and forgetting the human side. But I can see that's a massive part of it. Is it let's talk more about that. What about this human side? How do we prioritize that?
Yeah, I think there is a danger we go too much on the numbers side. I do see that, and I see that often in conversations within the sector of sort of impact. And if you're not showing the numerical side, then you're not doing impact well. And I think there is lots of value in the other side, and the human story and the impact made. I do think, and I do think from my experience, that connects with the public much better than your sort of pure numbers do. And so I do think there's a lot more to do. And yes, I think we need to be careful also as funders not to funnel people down one route, and not to say,
Mm,
well, you don't do impact very well because all your stuff's
mm,
about, the
mm.
value and the impact stuff. Like I say, there is a balance.
Yeah,
There is
yeah.
absolutely a balance to be had. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the human side, and that is what we're here to do as a sector, right? We're here to benefit the people that we support, and the work that we do moving forward, and that stuff has always been more impactful for me. So, yes, I'd like to see us, having more of that balance in our
Mm.
discussions about it, and not losing sight of that's why we're here.
I like it. So let's tick into this leadership stuff then, because you've mentioned trustees and talking about how they can support and understand, but also I guess the leaders as well are a part of that. Sometimes they might even feel a step
Yeah,
away, right? So how do you think that trustees and leaders can support each other then when, and let's go specifically for like maybe a charity that's going through uncertain times. How do you think trustees and leaders could support each other through that?
yeah, and I think one of the most important things, and I've been through turbulent times as a leader and as a trustee with different organisations, and different circumstances that you go through, and I think one of the most important things is to not lose sight of why you were all here in the first place. That
Mm,
for me as a
mm,
chief exec, I've always tried to view that my trustees are giving their time voluntarily because they care about the cause as much as I do, right? And they care fundamentally about it. And I've had the
absolutely.
joy of working with some excellent trustees
Mm,
in my time. And so I would say trying to stay together as a group, as a team
mm,
during difficult periods is really important. It's too easy to go with the blame cycle, or
hmm.
the things aren't going so well for us, someone's got to be responsible for this, right? There is obviously a space for accountability, of course,
Of course.
and performance management and all of those sorts of things. But you can't, instantly jump to that. You need to knuckle down in the hard times,
Mm,
when it's difficult for the organisation. Everybody's got a role to play in, digging you out of that, of getting you through that, and staying together through that period and benefiting from each other's skills. And I think that you hope that you've built the open trust and respect and the ability to have open conversations way in advance of you
yeah.
getting into a situation where
Yeah.
those things come to the fore, right? You've got those relationships in place, you know each other, you know how you work, you know who they are as people and what they care about, and their values. And so you're able to navigate and sort of weather your way through it. I think where it goes pear shaped sometimes is when people go in on themselves, they stop communicating,
Mm,
or they worry about their own role and responsibility in it and look to pass the buck on to somebody else. And that is all of us involved. I think we've got to work really hard to not do that and not move it forward. So I would say remembering and coming back to why you're here,
yeah.
but also maintaining that open communication all the way through. And that
Yeah.
sort of start with trust and respect, right, for all of your dealings with each other, and find a way through, I think is really important.
And this just constantly links back to the why piece, doesn't it? Again, which is backed up by our fundraising, backed up by the stories from our beneficiaries and service
Yes,
deliverers. So yeah, that binds us all, doesn't it? Actually, these
it
stories.
does.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
love this. So we deliver the governance app. If anybody doesn't know, it's a free tool
Yeah.
to basically do a self-assessment alongside the kind of code of conduct, charity code of conduct. And we speak to groups where they find these kind of governance reviews are uncovering maybe like a blind spot, you might call it. And so, in your experience, are there any areas that you think boards do tend to overlook?
There is honestly a mixture of things. And I love doing governance reviews. It's one of the things I really enjoy doing, particularly because having been both a chief exec and a
Yeah,
trustee, I see either side, and it's really interesting to work with an organisation through the challenges that they've got, and where they're open to the things that need to change and doing
yeah.
things the right way. So I would say always be open about your own governance. Be open to having external insight on it, and be open to the fact that governance, right,
Mm,
is never something you can just tick off as done. You can never
hmm.
just go as a chief exec, oh, my governance is done, right? I never need to
Mm,
worry about that again. It's like I often say to people when I'm talking about governance and governance reviews, I often say to people, it's like tending a garden, right? If you
mm.
grow stuff, there is always jobs to be done to stay on top of it, right? To tend it, to weed it, to keep it going.
Yeah.
Well, governance is the same, right? It requires constant work. There is always things to be done. You're never at point B on that spectrum of point A to point B.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
are
yeah,
somewhere on the journey. All
yeah.
of us are, and sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back, and sometimes you have to come back to look at things. So, that's my sort of passion around governance. But
Mm.
in terms of what I see, some of the common threads that often come out, one of the most interesting questions for me to ask sometimes to trustees and to leaders when I go in and do a governance review is, does the board ever disagree on things, and do they have disagreements, and how those disagreements are handled? Because the answers to it are really interesting, because organizations that feel they never disagree have almost some issues to sort of work through, as those that say to me, we're disagreeing at every meeting, like we can never get along, in terms of maybe not we spend so much time on challenge rather than on support and those sorts of things. There are bits in both for them to work on and to learn. Yeah, definitely. There's definitely insights to be taken. And I think if you can handle, and it comes back to what we were saying about through challenging times, if you can disagree agreeably, right, as a board, you can air things, but you can do that with respect and with trust and with openness, and that it doesn't destroy relationships. You don't burn any bridges. You don't accuse each other of, you're able to air and have, discussions. For me, when I've been a trustee in those circumstances, I think that's some of the best experiences I've had as a trustee, of where you really see and you engage in conversations that are intellectually stimulating, that you care about the organization, but you're able to air different perspectives, to hear other insights and perspectives from around the group, and then achieve compromise, right? Reach a middle ground on how you move forward. I think there's some of the really good experiences that I would say I've had as a trustee, and really good boards that I've been part of. And the contrary is also true, where people have rubber stamped everything and never disagree and never challenge. That is, equally, we've seen what happens when you get into those situations with charities that have lost sight of good governance and effective governance. So I would say that ability to disagree but do it well is undervalued. And the other thing I'm really passionate about around this, and I often talk about with governance reviews, is the diversity of thought around the table and perspective. And I think this is an area where the sector still does this nowhere near as good as we should. And I mean diversity of thought in the round. I mean skills around the table, backgrounds around the table, the things that we bring, the lived experiences we've had, all of that. And I think, again, when you're a homogenous group, you don't have that benefit. And the best boards I've been part of, or that I've had when I've been a chief exec, have been boards that have had that true diversity in the round, that have had different thoughts, different perspectives in that group, different skills, different lived experiences, because you see things differently, and you learn from each other, and you get to bounce these issues around. So for me, they're probably the two things that I would say I see most, and where I still think there's a lot more room for us to grow and do better on those fronts.
Yeah. Wow. That's there's definitely space to grow into. I think it's something that really stayed with me was when we restructured at DSC one time, and it was when I was in my previous head of customer service role, and it was my department. And I didn't necessarily in the short term agree with the decision, and it's because it impacted my team, and there was an emotional kind of moment for me to hear about the restructure. And some of the listeners, and I'm sure you do as well, Rob, know my CEO, Deborah Alcock-Tyler. And she must have noticed when I left the meeting that I had a face like a bulldog chewing a wasp or something like that. And she said to me, I'm not looking for your agreement, I'm looking for your alignment. And it was just like, damn, it's so true, isn't it? Like, I fully trust the directors, I fully trust the leaders, and to have made the right decision. And I'm experiencing an emotional reaction, but now my job isn't necessarily even to agree, but it's to now align with the organization and understand that there's a bigger picture at play here. And just
definitely. I think there's so much good that comes from when and part of the reason why I've always been inspired to be a trustee and the things that I've enjoyed have been when I've been part of a board that aren't all like me. They don't all look like me. They don't all come from the same backgrounds as me. They don't have the same, we've got mixed skill sets. We've got different outlooks on the world. We've got different values, perhaps, in some areas, but other things where we're aligned. There's joy that comes from that, right? Because you learn and you experience from others. And I want to be around people that don't always think like me, right? I don't want to be just in a bubble of people who think exactly the way I do and those things. And I think, and increasingly in the age that we live in, I think that's harder and harder to find, right? That we move in those ways. So I really want us as a sector not to lose sight of that's part of what we should be aspiring to be, right? And to have those discussions and move ourselves forward. But we've got so much work to do, because you look at the stats and it is, it's pretty woeful in some areas. And I know there are lots of things that have moved forward, and there are some amazing organisations and individuals out there doing amazing work on this. But I think as a sector, we've got to look more inwardly, and we've got to really step up our game on this, particularly with the challenges society faces right now, and that we are seeing, increasing rise to the far right. We're seeing, all those sort of perspectives around us and history repeating itself. I think we've got to wake up and realise that now's our time, right? We need to make those changes.
Absolutely, yeah. And so we could go further down that route, but I'm just intrigued around this whole trustee piece. And you said you kind of learned from being a trustee. So for the CEOs listening, or maybe senior leaders or people aspiring to senior leadership, what do you think they gain by taking on a trustee role somewhere else?
Really good question, George. I would always encourage anybody who's a leader in a charity or a chief exec to go and be a trustee elsewhere. I would say, I'd encourage people to be trustees in general, because I'm passionate about it, as you can tell. But, I would say when you're a chief exec, I gained so much insight from seeing the other side and understanding and seeing it as a trustee, seeing good discussions, good papers, good chairing, seeing examples where I think, actually it gives you some reassurance and confidence. We're actually pretty good at this, and we do this pretty well, and you can offer, your thoughts and feedback into changing it and making it better. But you get that real sense of it, and you also understand what it's like when you're not in the charity every day as a trustee, and you're not involved operationally in the same way, and you're looking at things from a more governance and strategic, point of view, or you should be. And seeing that difference, and that how you fill that gap between understanding what's going on the ground and actually, being able to contribute, and sort of seeing that, and seeing the difference between management and governance in action, and the areas where it's good, and the tensions where sometimes those things become more blurred, because naturally they do, and the areas where there are more clear-cut things. So I would say the insight and the experience I gained from that made me a better chief exec, without a shadow of a doubt, because I was able to bring back those perspectives into it. And so I would always encourage people, and if you're an aspiring leader, no better way to gain some strategic and governance experience than to go and be a trustee, because you see it differently, and you take part in those discussions on a much higher level for the organisation, when you're worrying about the money, and you're worrying about the staff, and you're worrying about the volunteers, and you're worrying about how do we break even this year, or how do we move things forward. It gives you a much different perspective of the compromises and the challenges and the sacrifices that come with being a trustee, but also perhaps gives you an insight into what your leaders go through every day. Because I think, again, when I was a middle manager in an organisation, or I was more junior, sometimes you look at leadership and you think, why do we do this? Or why did they make that decision? You don't understand the compromises, and you don't understand the sort of the nature behind it. And I think sometimes to go and do that elsewhere, you maybe see why, and you see the compromises and the challenges that maybe they want to do this, but they can't. They have to go this route because, and those sorts of areas. So yeah, huge insights you can gain.
Yeah, and we talk about it at DSC all the time. Obviously, we're more sort of like an infrastructure body, and the information we have from our books to our courses is all freely available to staff here. So yeah, even the responsibility here as a member of staff, we put that quite heavily onto people actually to go and volunteer, and we do half a day free volunteering for staff a month. I'm not sure if that's something you're familiar with, Rob, in your organisations, but something that we're quite proud of, the fact that we push people to that. But also, we are a step away from beneficiaries too. I mean, you're my beneficiary, and the charities are our beneficiaries, right? But actually, we're really here to serve our charities' beneficiaries. Helping you to help others is our motto. So trying to get closer to that as well is also a nice goal for us. I love it, and I think that's really important. I mean, we do call ourselves sometimes the voluntary sector, right? And obviously, the board are all volunteers. And go on, what are you going to say?
No, I was going to say the name is such an interesting one, isn't it? I just, and I don't think we've come round to the right thing yet. But yes, I think I've always, the voluntary sector has always not quite felt right to me, and I've always, and third sector absolutely does not feel right to me. Having been in
Absolutely.
both the others, I think that's awful. It always puts us as a third,
It's funny,
as a
isn't it?
sort of, no one wants to be bronze, do they? In that way. So, I don't think that's great. And so, and so I do see, the need for us to really think through that. And I know there's lots of voices out there that are talking about that and sort of pushing things forward in a different way of talking about impact and social impact and putting us more on that side rather than,
Exactly.
because even charity, I think now, and I still would refer to myself as a charity sector leader or a charity consultant, but
Yeah.
there is definitely that sense that has charity served its time as the term, and actually is there. The world has moved on. It's kind of harks back to that Victorian, sense of, charity, and I don't know that is always comfortable, for me and where we sit.
Because
So
the
I think
meaning
that's
won't
another
change.
important concept.
Yeah, the meaning won't change, but the language could change. And I'm so biased because I'm so in it, Rob, and I think maybe you are too. But it does surprise me sometimes when I talk to people about charities and even friends, and they say, "Oh, so you volunteer, do you?" It's like, obviously no, I'm obviously
No,
paid to
no,
work.
absolutely
So
not.
yeah,
No,
the word
no.
itself almost misleads, I think, sometimes. But yeah, that's an educational piece as well. We could reclaim that word positively maybe one day.
Yeah, it does, and I think not that voluntary isn't important. It absolutely is
Oh, of
important,
course,
and
yeah.
as a long term, I've been volunteering longer than I've worked in the sector. Right? Of course, volunteering is always, for me, really up there, and particularly skilled volunteering is another area I'm really passionate about. However, I do think that it undersells the professionalism that you need to work and lead in our sector. And I think that is an area where we shouldn't undersell ourselves compared to public sector leaders or private sector leaders, because actually the stakeholders and the weighing up all the time, and they're just keeping the lights on and keeping us going in our sector, in our world. It's really hard to do. It's really, really hard to lead a charity, and
Yeah.
we shouldn't, undersell that.
I think sometimes I've worked in big business, and it's almost more straightforward because it's profit, right? What makes us more
Yeah,
money, and that's what
yeah,
the shareholders demand by law. There's not necessarily like they're these big evil corporations. They're just in this system, which is a profit-led system. And then you come to a
yes,
charity, and actually, it's like, well, can we send out our marketing in that plastic? Because now I'm creating a problem for Surfers Against Sewage and Friends of the Earth, and
yeah,
can I make my staff work longer hours? Because now I'm creating a problem for Calm or for Mind and Samaritans,
yeah,
and
yeah,
suddenly you're now
yeah,
beholden to every other charity. I see it as, and
yes.
it's not quite like that, but it almost is, right? And so, yeah, we have to not just balance up the ethics of running our organization and the success of being financially viable and still serving our mission, but actually, are we doing it in a way that benefits the charity sector?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
yeah,
and benefits society wider, as you say,
exactly.
and not getting into, causing more societal problems than you're here to fix. So, yes,
Exactly.
there's a lot of challenges to it. So, yeah, I think I think sometimes it's undersold.
Yeah.
The level of expertise and the professionalism and the other things that you have to do to be a good charity leader and
Mm.
move these things forward. It's complicated, and we are so regulated, and we are
Mm.
there is so many pressures on us all the time.
Mm.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And, you're everyone's football, when they want to talk about, the things in the sector that don't work, or the media interest that we sometimes see that has, veers itself one way, and we end up
Of
as the
course.
ones getting the sort of the kicking in between. So
Of course.
it's really, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, and the voice is never given to your sub 100K turnover garden somewhere. Like that's
Yeah.
never ever. And then you go to volunteer somewhere like that, and that's where I used to volunteer at St Mary's Secret
Yeah.
Garden in Hackney, and they're a world away from the pains that apparently the charity sector has. They're actually just a lovely community run by lovely staff who are serving in a crucial part of the area, helping disadvantaged adults. And so, yeah, there's almost like a few different scales to this, and I think the smallest ones never really get their voice above the parapet in
No,
those conversations.
you're absolutely right. I don't think they do, and I don't think there's enough understanding of how difficult it is to lead small entities as well, and
Mm,
to found and
mm,
sort of take them
hmm
forward. And you're right, there is so much good, despite what I've said around some of the areas where we really need to learn and to do more and to do better. There is so much good in the sector. There is, and everywhere you look, there are good examples, and we can always look at the bad, things and the things that need to change and the things that move on, and the things that don't make sense. But there is so much good, and that's what keeps me in the sector. But also, I love the dynamism of our sector, right? I love the
Mm,
fact that our sector is made up of so many different charities of all different shapes,
hmm.
sizes, interests, causes. I think that's brilliant. The fact that we've got like such an ecosystem of all these different things everywhere.
Yeah,
It's one of the
absolutely.
things I love about it, and really enjoy working with different charities in different parts of that sector, rather than just saying I'm a leader in this particular part of the sector. I like bouncing
Mm.
around and doing different things in different parts. So yeah, I think you're spot on.
Yeah, me too. And I think we're champions of flexible working as well in the age where people are kind of demanding that almost,
Yeah,
especially the younger
yeah,
workforce. I think we're in a position to be able to accommodate that and gain
yes.
access to a really skilled workforce that don't want to do a 9 to 5 in an office anymore, or maybe they do, right? But it's potentially then we're able to accommodate that as well through different charities.
Yeah.
So this leads me up to my final point. Then you've mentored leaders, you've been a leader, you've got a lot of experience. How do the leaders that you've mentored in the past stay grounded in this kind of, I'm not going to use the word chaotic, but in this busy like environment of leading charities?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, especially when the demands are so stark on you and the time
Mm,
pressures and all the other things around it. And looking after your own well-being is obviously
mm,
so important. And being resilient to cope with that is a challenge for a lot of leaders that I mentor and work with. I would say to stay grounded is to stay true to your cause, right? Of your personal values, of why you are leading the organisation that you're leading, what you care about, with it. Of course, that comes with a cost sometimes, a personal cost in terms of the trauma and the other things that can come from that. But I think staying grounded and true to your values is really important. And I think for staying relevant and having support around you
mm,
is to be part of peer networking, to be to have a mentor that is outside of your organization. I think for
nice.
any chief exec
Good
is
idea.
absolutely essential, because it's somebody who is separate from your organization, who is mentoring you as an individual and as a leader, someone who's probably been there and been through some of those dynamics. And I think when I've had really impactful mentors, they've been people who have challenged my thinking as well as supporting me, have given me that time and space in a confidential, open atmosphere where I could say what was on my mind, and I could talk about the challenges that I'm experiencing, or the things where I think I'm weaker and got work to do, and the things where I think I'm doing okay, and those sorts of areas. And I think that is massively important, and hugely powerful and beneficial to how you move forward. So I would say, in terms of staying grounded, I think definitely go and get a mentor,
Yeah.
build a support network, put time into building a support network around you of other people who
Hmm.
do your job elsewhere, and other
Mm,
people that you connect with, share values with, that you can talk things over with. I think is
absolutely.
really important. And making space for that is really important too. Make space for going and having a coffee and talking things through with somebody,
It's the job.
and those sides. It's really important.
Yeah. So I guess a Kivo, a Sivo, that's an area
Kivo,
to go down the route of.
massively
Yeah.
important. Fun. Yeah, absolutely. I do some mentoring for a Kivo. They're
Perfect.
fantastic. They do loads of work, and you can access mentoring for free from lots of organisations out there. Do it. I do some for Cranfield Trust. I do some for Kivo.
Yeah.
There is the Kilfinnan Group that does free mentoring for business leaders.
Wow. Yeah.
There are lots of avenues to go down where you can find somebody, or approach somebody who you've always admired as another leader in the sector, and see if they'd be willing to mentor you and to take that on. So yes, I think there's lots of routes, but it's really powerful, really really
Yeah.
powerful.
When we were talking about fundraising earlier and feedback, I think something I say, and I wonder what you think of this, is it's quite easy to ask, have you got any feedback for me? And it's even easier to ignore that question. And so I ask
Yeah,
people to phrase it as a consider question. Is if we could make one difference to this application, what would that be? Or and I'm thinking
yeah,
that kind of positioning of that could also be used for mentoring. Would you consider mentoring me? And
yes,
just
absolutely.
asking it in a soft way that allows them an easy way to get out. I think could be quite a nice path to go there if you do pop into someone's LinkedIn inbox, and the worst thing that's going to happen is they
Yeah.
won't see you and they can
Yes.
get busy.
Yes.
But yeah, would you consider having a conversation with me over a coffee about X? I think could be a
Yeah.
safe way in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rob, I love it. I don't know how long we've gone. I've got my timer off, but I think we've just done about 50 minutes, just under. So thank you so much. Now, how
No
would
problem.
I find you, Rob? I'm listening to the podcast. I want to talk to you. How do I do it?
Yeah, sure. So I am Rob Avann. I'm on LinkedIn. I am also, so feel free to connect with me there. It'd be great to connect. And my website, I am orchardparkconsulting.co.uk. And on there, you can find out more about my background, my the services, the things that I do now as a consultant. And so feel free to connect with me through that route. My email address is rob@orchardparkconsulting.co.uk.
Perfect. And that's Rob Avann. Avann is Avann.
Yeah,
Amazing. And so some
thank
of
you.
you who are listening as this comes out, thank you very much for jumping straight on it. This will be timely for you. Rob is joining us at Grants Unlocked on September the 18th on Thursday, as he said earlier, just for our common mistakes in grant application session. So really glad to have you on board, Rob. But for those people that may be listening in the future, which I'm sure is most of you, obviously Rob's just given his details there. So thank you so much for joining us. Anything else, Rob, before we go?
No, not at all. Just to say thank you, George. Really interesting and inspiring and insightful conversation. So I love talking about this stuff. So it's always great to do it. So no, thanks for having me on.
You're a top legend, honestly. Thank you so much, Rob. So we'll
No
sign
problem.
off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of DSC's Charity Questions. See you next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Charity Questions podcast brought to you by the Directory of Social Change. DSC provides training courses, publications, online funding databases, research, conferences, and lots of free resources just like this to the charity sector. If you want to get more involved with this podcast, follow us along on social media where we announce the guests we have upcoming, and you can contribute your own questions for me to ask on the podcast. Thanks again for listening. See ya.